How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
You guys like helicopters?
Yeah, they're all right. They're all right. I mean, every now and then, I think because my office is so close to the law enforcement center downtown, every now and then get one or two flying over. It's always more just, I mean, and because we're in an old house, it just shakes the whole damn building.
Well, you are going to really sympathize with Mr. Dan O'Bannon on this episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I remember the Return of the Living Dead zombie from our Romero's series, or no, it was the zombie. He stands up and gets all chopped up. Remember, in the helicopter blade?
Oh,
Not
yeah.
Not Return. It's a
Yeah, that was in Dawn. Yeah, we haven't talked about Return yet.
Well, sorry, I meant to say Dawn. Dawn.
So what's your point? That guy probably doesn't like helicopters?
That zombie doesn't. Yeah, that zombie's not thinking about much these days.
Start the show, Gary.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. It is a podcast that's dedicated to the history and evolution of cult and genre movies. I am one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
I am another host, Justin Bishop. I'm trying to match Gary's energy.
Yeah, there you go.
And to my left here is writer, comedian, former police officer. I don't know why I decided to throw that in there.
It's true.
I guess because we're talking about a movie about cops.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
Mr.
guess.
Todd A. Davis.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for
Okay.
having me on the show.
I love it. That's
Bringing
Todd
the
is
energy.
Todd is no longer a police officer. Let's specify that.
Retired.
Retired forever.
Yes, retired forever. I can't do that shit anymore.
Yeah.
Way to kill the conversation.
When I was there.
Well, I was just looking at Gary, like just messing with his arm over here.
Well, my arm itched. I was scratching. I felt like I had a spot on my arm. An exciting, immersive audio experience for everyone.
Oh, welcome everyone to part something of our Dan O'Bannon series. I have lost track of where we're at, but we're almost done with the career of Dan O'Bannon, but we're not quite
Thank
there
God.
yet. We've got to. No, this has been fun. This has been a fun series.
Yeah, this has been a good one.
His career is just, I don't know. It's very intriguing to me because it just never took off really, but he made some really good movies. He made some obviously Alien's amazing. And the movie we're talking about next week is one of my favorites. The one we're talking about this week though, first time I've ever seen it. Nope. I liked it, but this is the first time I've ever seen it. So I had no real history with it. This is the only movie we've talked about on this series that I just had no history with at all. So it was kind of a fun one to really dive into, I think, and a surprising amount of information out there about this one. So for our next stop on our journey through Dan O'Bannon's career, we're going to once again meet a bit of turbulence. And I did not mean to make a flying reference right then, but maybe it was subconscious. But at this point in his career, Alien was still the closest thing to O'Bannon's vision that had ever made it to the big screen, with one big caveat, and we've mentioned this multiple times because it's a big deal, I think, in O'Bannon's career, is that the screenplay was rewritten prior to filming. And his next big budget outing would come 2 years later in the form of an action film about a high-tech police helicopter set in Los Angeles, a film that O'Bannon would later, in typical Dan O'Bannon fashion, pretty much disown. That film, and the subject of this week's episode, is John Badham's Badham
is pretty awesome. Yeah, let's go Bad Ham.
It's a movie called Blue Thunder.
Roy Scheider is Frank Murphy, a lone wolf.
Freeze!
Who's about to become a guinea pig.
I thought it was illegal to arm police helicopters.
Well, that would depend on the circumstances, wouldn't it?
Columbia Pictures presents Blue Thunder, a flying arsenal that hears through walls, sees in the dark, and thinks your thoughts.
Wherever you look, the guns follow.
It was designed for war-torn countries.
One civilian dead for every 10 terrorists. That's an acceptable ratio. Unless you're one of the civilians.
It was assigned to American cities.
You talking about crowd control from the air?
That's what this special detail is all about.
They told Murphy to test it. They didn't tell him what it was for.
A dozen of these copters and you can run the whole damn country.
Who was behind it?
Where are we? Federal building.
Really? Hey, you want to find out what's going on in there?
Certainly do.
But when Murphy went looking for answers,
Got all this on tape?
I got every word of it.
If it gets back to me, I'll deny it.
the answer came looking for him. They had the ultimate weapon and the perfect plan. But Murphy stole their thunder.
I think Bad Ham is a rival company to J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot.
Well, robots would win, and if there was a fight.
Well, it depends on how much ham there is.
How do you think they fed toddlers before there were helicopters and airplanes? You know,
man.
Just before you
That's
could make
true.
those noises. Like,
Does anyone do the helicopter? It was always airplanes.
You know, I used to have a barber when I was a kid that would always say, "Do you want a helicopter or the airplane today?" As though his shears, I guess, made different noises, but they didn't. No, looking back, I'm like, he was just fucking with me the whole time. Like, he was just like,
Wait,
"Same
that was
one.
like the
I don't
sound
care.
of-
It's gonna sound like me turning on my shears."
That was just the sound of his shears
Yeah,
that he was referring to. Interesting.
yeah. He would just the barber was feeding me.
I don't think that gentleman has ever heard an airplane or a helicopter before.
Yeah, you're probably right. Anyway,
So-
that's a good story. This episode's starting off weird. A lot of weird conversation we're having going into Blue Thunder.
Well, let's just talk about the movie then. So Dan O'Bannon began writing the screenplay for Blue Thunder in the late 1970s with a guy named Don Jacoby, another screenwriter who he was living with at the time. And this was around the time just after Alien had come out. And O'Bannon and Jacoby had discussed working on a spec script together. And the idea was that Jacoby was going to do most of the writing with O'Bannon's name listed first on the screenplay for what O'Bannon calls practical reasons, which basically means because they knew that because of the success of Alien, that having O'Bannon's name on there first would help the screenplay sell.
This is a story of Dan O'Bannon's life. Like, everybody
really
just wants
kind
to
of
use
is.
that Alien screen cred.
Yeah, he's making a career out of it. And there wasn't really an idea for the script at the time. They're just like, hey, let's write something together. And it wouldn't take very long before an idea came along. And like so much with O'Bannon's career, the idea for the script was the result of him just being angry. So they lived in Hollywood at the time, him and Jacoby. And they couldn't sleep at night because these police helicopters would constantly fly around overhead around their apartment, and they would like hit their house with searchlights. And it was just really annoying. It was really irritating. So one night when this is happening, Dan O'Bannon just turns to Jacoby and he says, "We should make a movie about this." So that's a pretty broad idea for a screenplay. How do you make a compelling story about helicopters constantly flying overhead? Well, if you're Dan O'Bannon, you use those helicopters as a symbol for government intrusion into our private lives. Here's what Dan O'Bannon had to say about it. This is from an interview in Starlog magazine in 1983 to coincide with the release of the film. He says, quote, "Helicopters per se, I like. I don't particularly like them going back and forth over the sky, watching us and everything. The police have those things up there because they can prevent crime. They're very handy. The trouble is that the police don't particularly care if they drive the rest of the population crazy or violate the rights of everyone else in order to catch a criminal. They don't care about preventing crime. They care about catching criminals. And towards that end, they will do anything to the rest of the citizenry. They don't care. That's what this picture is about." That's a pretty big concept for a movie, that for an idea that spawned from just being annoyed by a helicopter.
Yeah.
The idea of government, intruding into your private lives, which is very much what this movie is about, especially what it originally started as.
Yeah. And he's not wrong.
He's
well,
not, no.
I mean, but also at this point, I feel less sorry for Dan O'Bannon. I'm like, listen, O'Bannon, you're coming in here with all these lofty goals for your screenplay. And you know, the second you pass that off to somebody, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, the privacy laws and stuff. Anyway, you got a helicopter? What kind of cool shit does the helicopter do? Does it blow things up? Does it turn into a robot or something?
It does not do that. I bet that was passed around. I bet that was a production note. The original script to Blue Thunder was vastly different from the film that would eventually end up on screen. It was definitely more overtly political, attacking the concept of a police state controlling the population through high-tech surveillance and intimidation. And while writing the script, they actually consulted with and received a lot of help from a guy named Bob Woods. He was a captain. He was the chief of the Los Angeles Air Support Division. And they were very supportive. Nobody really paid much attention to the Air Support Division, so I think they were happy to get some recognition, but they couldn't use that name for reasons that will become obvious in the film. But the first draft of the screenplay was written in 1979, so this is right as Aliens coming out. And its main character, Frank Murphy, was written as less of a hero and more of a total maniac with deep psychological issues who goes on a rampage, destroying much of Los Angeles before being blown to bits by F-16s. So he's not quite the guy that we get in this film. Listen, we've been on this O'Bannon series for a month and a half or something now. Yeah. We've all gotten to know O'Bannon pretty well, I think, as well as we can through just, knowing the guy through interviews and things like that. So it might be stating the obvious to say that O'Bannon was less than pleased about the changes that were made to his script. This guy does not like people messing with. I mean, he knows that scripts are going to be rewritten. That's just the nature of the beast in Hollywood. But he was not happy with how this particular one was restructured.
And he's working here with Jacoby, who is also pretty solid in his own right. I mean, the guy, he does a bunch of stuff with Dan O'Bannon. I think they do like Invaders from Mars and Life Force together after this. Yeah. But Jacoby does like the Philadelphia Experiment and Arachnophobia and like one of the Death Wish movies. And I think he did the screenplay for John Carpenter's Vampires and stuff like that. So he's a pretty well-established screenwriter, or not at this point.
Well,
but
not at this time he had not. I don't think at this time he had anything produced. This is the beginning of his career here. But yes, he goes on to do quite a lot of pretty good films. I mean, John Carpenter's Vampires notwithstanding.
Don't start.
But one of the many people that O'Bannon has beef with about this particular movie, probably the guy he's got the biggest beef with about this particular movie, is the man who directed this film, John Badham. Beef. John Badham. Badham is the director who, like many directors, especially at this time, got his start in television before having a major breakthrough with his second film, which was 1977's Saturday Night Fever.
Hey, yo.
Have you guys seen Saturday Night Fever?
Oh, man.
It's a movie that a lot of people know about but haven't actually seen, I feel like.
I fall into that camp, yeah.
It's people know it because of the Bee Gees and all that shit. And you think it's this big, like, lighthearted romp. It's not. It's fucking dark. It's a fucking dark, depressing movie. It really is. Like, I'm not exaggerating. It's if you only know it from like it being like a disco movie or whatever, it goes to some pretty dark places. It's actually very, very good. It's a very good movie. Nice. I would recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it. But so Badham followed that film up with 1979's Dracula. He wanted to change of pace, so he goes over to England, does Dracula with Frank Langella in the title role, and then his next film is going to be Blue Thunder. He was actually working on Dracula when he had the Blue Thunder offer given to him.
He's also the brother of Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird.
What? Really?
Like from the movie?
Well, not from the book. So, her is Mary Badham plays Scout, and This is her brother. Just throwing that out there.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Cool. His later credits, this guy had a pretty cool career. Like, his later credits included the Matthew Broderick film War Games. It actually came out the same year as Blue Thunder later on in the year. Short Circuit, which we all loved when we were kids. I mean,
Johnny Five,
our age. Johnny Five. Point of No Return, which is like the La Femme Nikita remake. And then the classic Wesley Snipes action film Drop Zone. You guys remember Drop Zone?
Oh, Yeah.
I don't.
He did
honestly.
he did Stakeout. You don't remember Drop Zone? I don't know. I was a big Wesley Snipes fan when I was like a teenager because mostly because of Demolition Man and then Passenger 57, and Drop Zone came around that time. It involved skydiving.
Wait, I just pulled it up, and I definitely remember that poster. So I'm sure it would start to come together for me as I went through it. Gary Busey, of course, is in there.
I mean, I haven't seen it since 1995 or 96, probably, right? Not long after it came out, but I remember liking it then.
Yancey Butler too. Whatever happened to her? Where's she at? I gotta find her. She starts off.
Gary's going down.
No, let's talk about Drop Zone with Wesley Snipes.
Oh man. Well, is it? And Michael Jeter's in it. Rest in peace. He was always one of my favorite like character actors back then. Anyway, we're getting off subject here. So after coming on as the director of Blue Thunder, Badham asked O'Bannon and Jacoby for some changes in the script. That's normal. And O'Bannon says that they, quote, slavishly and obediently made those changes, but it wasn't long before Badham brought in a screenwriter of his own, a guy named Dean Reiser. And the way that Badham describes it is that Reiser was basically brought in as essentially a script doctor, the same kind of job that O'Bannon had on Dead and Buried, only he happened to get a screenwriting credit on that, but script doctors usually don't. But Badham wanted Reiser to flesh out some of the characters in the script. But what O'Bannon says Reiser did was, quote, he came in and moved around the commas. This Starlog interview with Dan O'Bannon from 1983 is a fucking delight because he just comes across as the crankiest dude about what they did with his screenplay in this movie. I'll tell you, here's one thing about Dan O'Bannon. He will speak his mind. If you watch him in later interviews, like on there's a documentary about the making of Blue Thunder that was on some of the out of print DVD releases. And he's a little more political, I guess, where he's playing the politics and being a little nicer about it. But you read interviews from the time that it came out, and he was not happy with the movie.
It's too bad. This is a pretty good movie.
Yeah. Well, what concerned O'Bannon was that he felt like the rewrites took the teeth out of his script. So in the original script that he'd written, which you can find online, the LAPD, the police, they were pretty much the bad guys of the piece. All of the bad stuff, all of the various outrages committed were done so by the cops. But when Badham and Columbia Pictures came in, they turned the police into heroes and then made these like federal agents, the federal government. They made them the villains.
I felt like they did like a mix. Like when they find the tape, it's a tape of like federal agents and LAPD. Well,
yeah, but I think by making Murphy more of like a hero is kind of what he's more referring to.
Oh, gotcha.
Because he was not very sympathetic also in the original script. As O'Bannon says, quote, the idea of portraying the LAPD as blameless champions of individual liberty at odds with the federal government is strange. And he's not wrong. I mean, that is kind of, they would 100% be working together on something like this if this was the case.
Oh, yeah.
So the cast for the film included Roy Scheider as the lead character of Frank Murphy. Scheider, we know this is a few years after he had done Jaws and Sorcerer and in The French Connection. Like, he was a big star at the time. And what attracted him to O'Bannon and Jacoby's script, the original one before the extensive rewrites, was the political bent of the script. That's actually what attracted him to the project. That's what really spoke to him. Although he wasn't very keen to do a helicopter movie at the time, because he had just filmed William Friedkin's Sorcerer, which was filmed in the Dominican Republic, like out in the outskirts of the jungle. And he had to fly a helicopter 75 miles each day to reach the film's locations. Oh. So he was like, I'm tired of helicopters right now. I'm sick of helicopters.
Yeah, he eventually decided he had to get over the phobia because he did like the script so much, like you said. I mean, I had a quote from him from an article back then with him saying, the story supposes that some right thing or conservative group in the government decides that it will be a great idea for the crowd control in the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles to use these helicopters for surveillance and to arm them, which is a pretty frightening idea. So that, I guess, kind of gives you some idea of like how the script might have been beforehand. But he says, unfortunately, the other equipment they want to put aboard is equipment that can look through into your house, see anything that's alive, and be able to record any conversation from 500-600 feet up in the air. The ship then becomes a representation of the total invasion of privacy, a flying big brother. In the film, the character I play, Murphy, a Los Angeles helicopter pilot, knows that this is a very evil and unnecessary thing, so he has to do something about it. That was Roy Scheider. God,
Scheider.
You screwed me up on this.
We're gonna keep doing that.
Anyway, that's him explaining it. But the other thing that happened to him at the time was apparently, he had done Jaws, and so he's like well known for Jaws, and he had been apparently cast in The Deer Hunter, and
Really?
yeah, and he dropped out of The Deer Hunter. Like, he wanted to drop out of The Deer Hunter.
Which role?
Disagreed with something, and I cannot remember, and knew you were going to freaking ask that. But I mean, part of me wants to feel like it. I don't want to guess, but anyway, he had been cast in it, and he dropped out of it because he didn't think who goes around the country or around the world looking for their friend. That's what it was.
Robert De Niro, maybe.
Yeah, he said he didn't feel that character.
It's been a few years since I've seen it.
Same. So whoever that was, because he says he didn't feel like the character would do these certain things that they did, and he disagreed with it. So he tried to drop out of it, but he was under contract, so he had like a disagreement with them. But they agreed to let him out of the contract if he went ahead and did Jaws 2. And so he did Jaws 2, and then he was like, he only did it out of, he was hesitant. He wasn't a big fan. And then when Jaws 3 started being worked on, he said he knew there wasn't a snowballs, but he says, quote, Mephistopheles couldn't talk me into doing this. They knew better than to ask. But he said also, just in case, he went ahead and signed on to another role with a rival company. So there was no way legally and physically he was available to do Jaws 3. And so that
he did Blue Thunder, so he wouldn't have to do Jaws 3.
So he did Blue Thunder.
Wow. That's really great. I love that. I love that reasoning. But his description of that original script, you can see how that's pretty different. I mean, yes, the idea of the helicopter being an invasion of privacy is still in this, but the way his character reacts to it seems very different at first, at least, than in that original script. Because that first scene where you see him and Daniel Stern in a helicopter, this is before they're in Blue Thunder. I think they're in a regular helicopter at this point. They're already invading somebody's privacy. They're watching that woman do naked yoga.
Yeah.
So I feel like his character wouldn't have as big of a problem with the invasion of privacy because he's indulging Daniel Stern's character, really. It was his idea, but still,
he's very horny about all the things he can see from a helicopter.
Daniel Stern?
Yeah.
Yeah. He even when he like zooms in on that lady's boobies, he's like, "Oh, let me touch him." Like, it's very like
he is.
Like, dude, have you never seen cleavage before? You're like 25 years old. What? There's not even nipples. You're just looking at boobage.
I have the naked yoga scene. I have never been so disgusted and interested in something in my life.
Well, we already mentioned Daniel Stern. Of course, he plays the officer Lyman Good, who's sort of Frank Murphy's partner in this. You've got Candy Clark as Kate, who had been in like American Graffiti, and then Malcolm McDowell as Colonel Cochran, who is essentially the film's villain. I mean, I don't think Malcolm McDowell has ever played a character who's not a villain.
Yeah, there was like a conflict with the guy who was originally going to be in there. Was the guy from FX, that movie FX, Brian Brown, and he had something scheduling drop, and so they brought in Malcolm McDowell last minute to do this, convinced him to do it.
Yeah, they had to convince him because he was pretty reluctant to take the role because of the helicopters, but not for quite the same reasons as Scheider. McDowell has an intense fear of flying. Scheider doesn't like helicopters or flying, or specifically helicopters. McDowell is incredibly terrified of flying.
Wow.
And but he read the script and he told his agent, "I can't do a movie where I have to fly in a helicopter the whole time." His agent assured him that they'd be shooting the flying scenes on a studio backlot. That was what he was contracted to do, but that is not quite what happened because they ended up. he ended up coming to set, and he's seeing that Daniel Stern and Roy Scheider they're getting in the helicopters, and he was kind of embarrassed and didn't want to tell them that he didn't want to do it because he was scared. So he ended up doing it anyway.
One way to face your fears. Just
yeah, I mean, well, it apparently did help with it. But he was incredibly scared of flying. Like his wife at the time, which is Mary Steenburgen, was his wife at the time, and she said that she couldn't even get him to like on a 747. So she's like, I don't know how the hell you guys are going to get him in a helicopter.
Wow.
And they would do scenes where he was flying, and Roy Scheider tells it where they'd be watching the dailies, and he's acting while they're flying, and then immediately when they yell cut, he puts his head like between his legs because he just had to like. Right. He was freaking out basically.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but you'd never know it by watching the movie, honestly.
No, it's a good actor.
It's convincing. He's a good actor.
He's a cocky sumbitch.
Yeah. So, and then rounding out the main cast is Captain Jack Braddock. In his final film role was a great character actor by the name of Warren Oates, who unfortunately passed away like 2 months after the movie finished filming. They were in post-production. The movie ends up being dedicated to him. Warren Oates is one of my favorite character actors of all time. He is incredible. He did a lot of like Sam Peckinpah movies back in the day. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, The Wild Bunch, stuff like that. He's in Spielberg's Duel. He's a really great character actor. And he is so much fun in this role. I think his line delivery is incredible. I
was running this outfit when your idea of the big time was sitting in front of the boob tube watching Bugs Bunny gnawing on your fudge sickle.
It's so good. It's so good.
What's the other one he does?
That's my favorite one though. But yeah,
there's a moral to this story. When you're walking on eggs, don't hop. He's got a buddy fetish with his quotes. I think actually.
Are you guys familiar with Warren Oates like as an actor? No. Outside of this,
I'm really not super familiar with him, but he was one of my favorite parts about this movie.
I mean, if he's a character actor, I bet he's been in half a dozen things I love.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure I imagine at least one of you guys have probably seen The Wild Bunch at least.
Yeah, I've seen The Wild Bunch.
But he's in that.
In Stripes, I think he's in Stripes.
He's in Stripes. Yeah, he plays the sergeant in there. He's really, really good, and he's just one of those character actors who he kind of always brings his own charisma to the role. It's always he's still sort of always Warren Oates. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he was in a movie I've been actually wanting to rewatch, is one called Two-Lane Blacktop, which co-stars Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys and James Taylor. It's a road trip movie, a car movie. But it was directed by Monty Hellman, who passed away this week. And it's a really great movie. It's got a really great Criterion Blu-ray. But Warren Oates plays a character named GTO in that, and that's an outstanding movie. Would highly recommend that one.
You're supposed to be dumb, son. Don't abuse the privilege.
Kat actually suggested that when you're walking on eggs, don't hop, be a catchphrase replacement for me.
Anything's better than what you could say.
And I said, really? And she said, nah, never mind. Leave it, Johnny's the case.
That's a better, at least it's a form of, it's motivational.
A word to the masses.
Yeah, a word to the wise. Anyway,
the editor of this film, Frank Morris, he played the F-16 fighter pilot. I just thought that was interesting because they had like crew guys in here a lot. Like the director,
oh, really?
Like, John Badham is like the TV news director. It's his watch that Roy Scheider's, apparently John Badham's arm and stuff. Like when
really?
So yeah, seeing him looking at the watch and the countdown and stuff like that. Another interesting casting thing I thought was this guy Mario Machado, who plays the TV news anchor, and he is like the TV news anchor of 80s cinema because he is in like every RoboCop movie as a TV news anchor. He's in Scarface as a TV news anchor, and Rocky 3. He was on like Murder, She Wrote as a TV news anchor. Like he is just always a TV news anchor. That's just his
thing. But he was an actual news anchor.
Oh, was he an actual? I don't know. Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
Well, and I only know that because I noticed when I was looking at the credits on this is that he is credited as himself.
Oh,
it says Mario Machado himself. And so I was like, who is I don't know that name.
You're right. As I'm looking at it here, it does say Mario Machado.
Yeah, so I looked him up, and
Yep.
yes, he has played a lot of news anchors, but it's because he actually was a news anchor.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing that's important to mention for this film, I think, just to give it some credit, since there's not a lot of CGI, some of the stunts are fantastic in this movie.
Oh yeah, they are.
So there's guys like there's a Calvin Brown who's did like a lot of smaller acting roles throughout his career and did a lot of stunt work on a bunch of different movies. There's Terry Leonard, who's an uncredited stunt coordinator on this movie, but he's a guy who's like still working right now and had been working, like he started out doing, he was in like Blazing Saddles and Apocalypse Now, Cobra, all in this same year. He was doing, what was it? Oh, Romancing the Stone, Gremlins, Red Dawn, and Starman. And he's still, like I said, he's still around. He was like stunt coordinator on Death Proof and multiple Fast and Furious movies, the Bourne movies. Like he's all over the place. And the other guy I wanted to bring up is Monty Jordan. He's the official stunt coordinator of this movie, and he's been working since back on like True Grit with John Wayne. He was a stunt driver for the show SWAT. He was the assistant stunt coordinator in Alien. If you had a movie in the 80s that needed stunts, this guy was probably somewhere around there. He did uncredited work on Return of the Jedi, but probably the biggest question people would have about this movie, and that are old farts like us and can remember the show. Yes, he also handled Airwolf. So
with the Blue Thunder ripoff.
Yeah. So, which I think at this time was filming a TV movie, like right around the same time this happened, or right after, or something like that. At least right before it went to series. But we'll get all that. But so as you can imagine, when they were making Airwolf, he had done Blue Thunder or something. So yeah, they had somewhere in there it worked out for him, and they were like, hey, can you do helicopter stunts? And Monty Jordan said, this is how we do it. I wrote that.
I'm really glad we got a Montel Jordan.
I wrote that joke in my notes as I kept writing Monty Jordan.
Thank you, because that was definitely in my mind. I love when we can highlight the work of stunt actors, because stuntmen and stunt women are kind of the unsung heroes of these action movies, and they very rarely get any recognition. I can't believe that we're in the year 2021 and there's still not a stunt category for like the Oscars. As we're recording this, you guys will hear it in a couple of weeks, I guess, but as we're recording this, the Oscars are on this evening, and it just really blows my mind that these guys have never been just acknowledged by these awards organizations. It's really crazy, because
the guys actually like risking their lives to make movies.
Literally putting their lives on the line to get the movies made, and we can't even give them a fucking award. It drives me crazy, but so we'll try to give them the recognition. We don't have quite as big of a reach as the Oscars, but we'll give them something.
We're working on it.
Yeah, we're getting there. So Blue Thunder was shot on location in Los Angeles in late 1981. But as I mentioned before, the LAPD didn't allow the film to make any references to them by name, which is why the police force in the film is just referred to kind of a generic name of the Metropolitan Police. They couldn't use LAPD. They couldn't use the name of the Air Division. It's called like the Astro something division. But most of the film's aerial sequences were filmed with real helicopters, with these stuntmen that Gary is talking about. They used a modified Aerospatial Gazelle is the name of the helicopter that was stood in for the Blue Thunder. They actually had two of those in the film that they purchased for about $190,000 a piece, flew them out to California, and then heavily modified them for the film. And I mean, they very heavily modified them. The alterations made them so heavy that the filmmakers had to get kind of creative for certain shots to make the helicopter seem faster and more agile on film than it really was, because it actually moved kind of slow. Because I mean, it added a lot of weight to it, and it had like 1 inch thick walls, and it was a very heavy piece of equipment. And they would do trick shots, they would do sped up shots, and then like in one, well, it actually did this a lot, but in this one particular sequence, you know, the scene where Murphy like does the loop-de-loop at the end.
Yeah,
Rick, Malcolm McDowell's character, that was a radio controlled model helicopter, which they used for several shots where it wasn't safe to do it with the real thing. Like when the Arco Tower gets hit with a missile, the only way to safely that's towards the end of the movie, the only way to safely get the shot of the helicopter like flying away from the explosion was to use a model. They didn't want to fly a real helicopter that close to a falling tower that had just exploded. So they used RC helicopters in this a lot. They used RC F-16s as well, and they kept crashing.
Oh,
so a lot of the shots of the F-16s are composite shots.
I was gonna say it looked like a lot of composite stuff, or
those are composite shots
or something.
But yeah, there's some footage in the behind the scenes documentary of the F-16 models just like nosediving into the ground. They were having trouble with those.
Yeah, I mean, they do a good job though. I mean, with models when they're used right, I mean, it works. Like you can make it look like the real thing. It looks better than CG a lot of the time. So
because it's tangible,
right.
And they had originally planned on using a model building for that barbecue chicken restaurant that blows up. The missile accidentally hits the barbecue restaurant.
Yeah.
But then the production was able to find an abandoned building in Los Angeles downtown, which they were actually able to do the explosion at full scale, because fire is one thing. Like when you're using models, you can always tell it's a model because fire is going to be the size of fire regardless.
Right.
Fire and water in models, you can always tell. So they used it was an abandoned building. They built a facade on it. They rigged up, the van outside that flips. They rigged with explosions, and they used that great shot where it's really funny, where just a bunch of barbecue chickens come flying down.
Yeah,
they used real chickens.
Yeah.
They used real chickens because it was cheaper, because rubber chickens were, John Badham says that he's like, yeah, rubber chickens are like $10 a pop. We can go down and get these whole roasted chickens for $2.50 a pop. So we just bought like 1,000 chickens, and and then they rigged this whole stunt. They had these things in the air that were like held all the chickens. And at a certain point, John Badham, during the explosion, he was waving a flag, which was their signal to open these things up, and chickens just drop on the ground. And so you see these like stunt cars going through and sliding around the ground in that scene because they're sliding on chicken grease.
Oddly enough, it's kind of sad and kind of interesting at the same time, but apparently the homeless population in that general area were like very excited about the filming of this scene.
Yeah, they came up and they helped clean it up, picking up a bunch of chickens. It is kind of a waste of chicken.
I was gonna say.
At least the homeless people got their chicken.
I was about to say, it's like on one hand, it's kind of funny, and then on the other hand, you're like, these people just bought like 1,000 chickens just to dump them on the ground, and there's homeless people that are just looking for chicken.
At least looking for something to eat.
Yeah, but anyway, that's a bummer. Let's talk about something else.
Well, let's talk about Malcolm McDowell a little bit more, because I mentioned earlier how he had this fear of flying. He did this thing Roy Scheider talks about where he puts his head between his legs. Well, they did shoot a lot of they did some stuff with rear projection, but they did a lot of scenes where they were in an actual helicopter, and they would have someone else flying, because on a lot of these helicopters, you can actually fly from both seats. So you'll see a shot where it's kind of at an angle where you'll see Malcolm McDowell or Roy Scheider, but you can't see the other seats because the actual pilot's in the other seat. Now, Roy Scheider, by the way, he actually could fly. He was in the Air Force, and he would actually, scenes where he got in the helicopter and like took it off or landed, they would actually let him do that because he had the ability, but they wouldn't let him, for probably insurance purposes, actually fly up in the air. Right. But Malcolm McDowell was the same thing. So he's in the air, another guy's flying, but they kept having to reshoot his scenes because he would look really scared in them. And after every take, or after most takes, he would, as soon as they called cut, he would puke everywhere. He would just throw up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Most of those cockpit scenes are like you said, just like where they're flying at night and stuff. It's like rear projection, like on a sound stage. But yeah, I had a quote from Roy Scheider where he was saying, when we first started to make the film, the thought of Malcolm McDowell and myself flying around in copters wasn't really considered as much. But as we began to process the shots, we were so much better whenever we were in the copters. So it really required, or the shots were so much better whenever we were in the copters. So it really started to require that we both appeared in them, and we wound up doing most of the stunts ourselves. I mean, there was a stunt pilot aboard, and he was set back in the machine so you couldn't see him, but he was piloting all of the stunts with us in them, in the buildings and through the aqueducts. Everything you see out the window is what we saw, and it was pretty scary.
Yeah. Another scene that they talk about that I thought was really fun, another stunt kind of thing they talk about, was at the end when Murphy lands the helicopter down on the train track. Obviously they weren't going to do that with a real $200,000 helicopter, so they built a replica out of wood and rigged it with like gasoline and explosions. And then they asked the train people, hey, can we run your train into this helicopter? And they're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. So they put this thing on the tracks, and now it was going slower than it looks like in the movie. They cranked up the camera so that it would look like it's going faster. But yeah, that's an actual train going into a full-size replica of one of the Blue Thunder helicopter. And when you see Roy Scheider walking away from it and it explodes and he kind of ducks down, that's because the explosion was much bigger than they thought it was going to be. And it actually startled him, but it's a great reaction because he still kind of keeps doing that cool guy walking away from
he's still stoic about it,
but he does kind of jump a little bit, which adds a bit of realism to it that you don't actually get from a lot of those cool guy walking away from an explosion scenes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Some of the other cool stuff with like sets I saw were like the Piper Technical Center, which is the headquarters for the not LAPD, the
Metropolitan Police.
Yeah, the Metropolitan Police. This is before this is the first time that it was used in a movie. It was before it was operational, but so they built their stuff like right on top of it. But it's an actual government building right now, and but it's been used in a bunch of different movies like Beverly Hills Cop and Lethal Weapon 3 and Speed, and like it's I don't know what it is about that building, but I just found that kind of just an interesting side note. But also the city councilwoman, her house, it's an exterior set like at Warner Brothers Ranch, but it's the same house that's used for like Roger Murtaugh's house at Lethal Weapon.
Oh, yeah,
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So the one that like the toilet explosion.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
well, another one of my favorite sets is I love the chase with Kate through the drive-in.
Yeah.
They had originally shot that scene to be much longer. It was a much more of like a classic kind of action movie car chase. They even had a stunt where it was like up on its two wheels, like which was done in like a James Bond movie earlier, and something ridiculous like that works in a James Bond movie. But in this, it turned out to be a little bit too ridiculous and too unbelievable that she would be able to do these crazy stunts. So they kind of shortened it to just the stuff in the drive-in. And John Badham was shooting that scene. He was actually in the back seat with her as she was driving. It's scared to death because she's not a real stunt driver. But that was shot at an actual drive-in theater, which is no longer there. I think a grocery store is there now. but that's a fun scene because I do like that they shortened it because she doesn't seem like she's a capable like getaway driver. It seems kind of clumsy, which it should be because she's just a girl who got sucked into this situation,
There's a lot of really cool action sequences in this, like where they chop the police car in half and stuff with the gunfire. Like that's awesome too.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
The helicopter at the beginning landing right on that building. Like there's some great stunts in this. There really are.
I still wonder if the F-16 that he shoots down with Blue Thunder, where does that thing go? Because they never cover that. Does it land on a bunch of buildings or houses?
The one that like just shoots off into the air.
Yeah,
I thought about that too. Well, because the thing with this movie, it does the G.I. Joe thing where every time something's about to crash, like somebody parachutes out or you see them climbing, a car gets flipped over, and then you see people climbing out of it to show you that they're okay.
Well, you can't have Roy Scheider like murdering people, basically.
But that's what he did in the original script.
Right.
The original script, he just murdered people. But yeah, this definitely does the G.I. Joe thing where they show you that everyone's okay. Because G.I. Joe always did that. Like they would shoot a Cobra jet, the jet would explode, but you'd see somebody pop out with a parachute every time just to show you that these cartoons were not murdering people. This movie does. But yes, I thought the same thing, Gary, because that's what happens in that scene. The pilot ejects, but then the F-16 just goes flying off into the distance. I was like, that's going to land somewhere. It could be on a very well populated area.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny you said that because it reminded me of like remember Toy Fair magazine, and they always had like the comics with the toys like acting out the things or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was one scene where like He-Man's with the G.I. Joes and like Cobra shows up, and Cobra's running at him, and they're like, "Let's go, Joe!" And they all start shooting, and the lasers are like flying in the air, like arching over everyone. And like He-Man like looks at like the G.I. Joe guys, and he like pushes their guns down a little bit and like shoots like a whole line of Cobra soldiers down, and everybody stops, and like the Joes like look at He-Man, and they're like, "Dude, that is not how we play." What are you doing?
So O'Bannon and Jacoby were invited to the set as the writers, but O'Bannon didn't always like what he saw happening on set. When he talks about Badham, he does not mince words, because as we've learned about O'Bannon, he does not mince words. He said, quote, "John Badham has very little film sense. He directs a $20 million movie like a TV episode. When you actually see him on set, you realize how lost he really is."
Well,
yeah, not happy. He also describes one day where he was on set and Roy Scheider forgot one of his lines, and Badham's direction was, take this with a grain of salt, because again, this is coming directly from Dan O'Bannon, the world's angriest man. But he says that Badham said, quote, "It doesn't matter. It's only dialogue. Just say something and put the word shit in it." And I do have a feeling that he might be exaggerating here, but Scheider in his interviews, he does say that there was a lot of improvisation on set, especially in the dialogue between him and Daniel Stern, like when they're in the cockpit of the helicopter. A lot of that was improv.
yeah.
Wow.
Dan O'Bannon not trying to make friends ever.
He does not. He's never concerned with making friends.
No, does not suffer fools at all.
No, not at all. No.
For what it's worth, I saw they filmed for like 80 days and had like 450,000 feet of film by the end of it.
Wow.
So that just seems like a lot. So I found that interesting.
Yeah.
Probably just from filming aerial scenes over and over again too. Just like,
Well, you're doing a lot of that stuff from different angles and stuff too. You have to when you're doing big stunts like that, because a lot of those scenes, like the one where they blew up the helicopter on the train track, you got one shot. They had one helicopter. They're like, take two would have to be 8 weeks down the line so we can build another helicopter.
Right.
Like we got one. So you have to shoot it from different angles, which of course equals more film. So Blue Thunder was released theatrically on May 13th, 1983. It actually came in number one at the box office its opening weekend. It knocked Flashdance out of the top spot. It would go on to gross $42 million at the box office, plus an additional $21 million in video rentals. Very successful film. And the reviews were really kind as well. Variety called it a, quote, rip-snorting live-action cartoon, utterly implausible, but no less enjoyable for that. And then the Washington Post said that, quote, Blue Thunder hovers just this side of trash and the other side of credibility, but it propels a willing audience into adrenaline heaven. Those are amazing reviews.
That's
honestly.
not bad.
I would absolutely go see a movie described that way.
And like Roy
Roy
Scheider
live action cartoon. Hell yeah, I'm gonna go see that.
And Scheider's like, you could tell he's like into it. Another quote I found from him was talking about the movie. He saw something, I mean, he's obviously hoping for more out of this. He said, I think it's a very important movie. It alerts people to the kind of ultra conservative or even fascistic tendencies of some law enforcement personnel. There are people who would like to make sure your life is very well run and near, that you cooperate with the government and that they know at all times you are behaving as a good citizen. In other words, your personal freedom and your personal life is of great interest to them. Not really, but they're interested in making sure you're not doing anything wrong. You're also not free. You're not alive. You live in fear. You have no relationships with anyone that can mean anything because someone is always listening. So there's a spooky aspect to this film that I think is important. He hoped it would do to helicopters what Jaws did to sharks.
Well, the film got great reviews, or really pretty good reviews upon release. But I'm really curious about internet reviews on this one, Gary, because this is not like a cult classic. I wouldn't say this movie's almost kind of been forgotten to time. But I imagine there are people who have come across it. I watched it on Amazon Prime, I think, so it's pretty easy to find. So I'm curious, what people who have come across it on the internet have had to say about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because maybe because of the lack of popularity or whatever, that there's not as many reviews and very few 1-star reviews that I could find. So I will say that I don't know. Maybe it's just the lack of popularity, or maybe just people just think it's good enough that nobody decided they hated it enough to give it 1 star. But either way, I did find a few people, though, where it certainly sounds like somebody needs a nap. Let's see here. We've got this. I've mixed something up because I'm gonna review I'm gonna read this review, and you'll see that I mixed something up here. Animated trash is what this review says. In case you couldn't tell by the scantily clad, ridiculously endowed sex object on the cover.
I think that might be from Heavy Metal.
I was going to say, Roy Snyder isn't really wearing that much. No.
All right, so I got a couple.
Does he put on the Tara?
I'm telling you, this movie would not
motion.
This movie would not be forgotten if there was an extended scene of Roy Scheider putting on that outfit.
Wait, Daniel Stern in the Tara costume, and Roy Schneider just gets Den's loincloth.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
I like it. John D. Page says, lame action movie, but cool helicopter. At no time does this movie ever reach the point of being believable. And even for an action movie, at some point, it has to do that. The helicopter is very cool, but do they really think that if it was going to be used to keep everyday people in line, they would test it out in the open like this? Much less let a pilot that is known as a loose cannon be the one to test it? The other problem is that they go out of their way to keep the movie light and then add a very sick murder in for spice. Skip it. The only other really interesting one I found was this one from Aaron Capon Banner, who says his review title is "It's a Helicopter." It's just a sentence. That's the
it's a helicopter.
Subject. John Badham directed this helicopter adventure yard that stars Roy Scheider as LA police officer and police pilot Frank Murphy, who is assigned a new partner played by Daniel Stern and a new assignment to test pilot a new stealth experimental helicopter to be used to combat civilian crime. But Frank becomes suspicious when the project manager turns out to be an old nemesis from his Vietnam War days, a Colonel Cochran, played by Malcolm McDowell, who does indeed have nefarious plans for the Blue Thunder. And Murphy becomes determined to not only expose the program, but destroy it. Had I known the beginning of this review was just a recap of the movie, I would have skipped that part. It's an interesting premise and a good cast that are completely wasted in this cliche picture that becomes alarmingly ridiculous, right down to its preposterous showdown between Murphy and Cochran, which takes the viewer out of this picture altogether. 1 star.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, I don't agree with these people. I think there's some really good action scenes in this movie because some of the reviews I've read, like on Letterboxd and stuff, people talk about it like the action scenes are boring or whatever. But that final fight between Scheider and McDowell, like that's a great action sequence. And there are a few other ones throughout the film that are really good, I think. I mean, it's not, I don't know if this is an action movie classic. You know, if I were coming up with like a top whatever action movies, this would not be super high on the list. But I think the action sequences are really good. And I think the story is intriguing. I would have liked to have seen Dan O'Bannon's original version of this because I think it sounds more interesting to me, like the idea of having sort of an anti-hero at the center. But the movie that we got, I think, is pretty damn good.
There's a lot to like about it, I think. I mean, I was never bored. I think I was engaged the entire time. Like I thought that like a lot of the stuff was fun. Like it was just a fun action flick. I don't know. I don't have like a bunch of like outstanding things to say. It's not like, the best thing I've ever seen, but I will say, watching it, one thing I did come to the conclusion on is that Roy Scheider doesn't give it get enough credit as an actor because
he really doesn't.
He's very good, and there's scenes in this one that I thought of Jaws on just because of there's scenes that, for instance, there's the scene where Brody's talking to his son or whatever, and they're like imitating each other. That gets a lot of props to Spielberg, but the scenes where Scheider in this movie is talking to the woman and her son, you know, like he's interacting with them. He's very lovable, like likable. Yeah. I don't know, just somewhere
even
in there.
They clearly have had some issues in their relationship or whatever, but he never comes across as being like a jerk.
Yeah, there's just something about him that just is able to play like a tough guy when he needs to, and then he's just got this like you can't help but like him, to me at least.
Yeah.
And so
I do wish that the film had delved a little bit more into his PTSD. I mean, we get a little bit of that, and absolutely. you see in the end how Malcolm McDowell's character plays into that. But I feel like that was probably, I feel like there was some stuff left on the cutting room floor or taken out of the original script when it was rewritten that went deeper into that stuff.
It's funny you say that, because I mean that is stuff that hit me, but it was also like, at the end of the day, the movie that this became, like it or not, it felt like that might have been too deep for it, if that makes any sense. The Dan O'Bannon version of it, that probably would have been something that would definitely should have been tackled. But like in this movie, it just became like a fun 80s action movie. And so like, you know, they didn't want anybody to be sad about how fucked up Roy Scheider is, I think.
Right. Yeah. What do you think, Todd? What's Todd's take?
You know, I really do want to be positive about this one, but outside, it's the stunt work is amazing, and I don't think anybody can really dispute that. I think it's a good looking movie, but I feel
it's a really good looking movie. The cinematography is outstanding.
Yeah, but the character development and plot are a little light, and I really wish they had kind of gone full throttle on, you know, something a little bit more, something a little deeper, something a little more meaningful.
I'd almost like to see a remake.
I feel like because they didn't, I feel like this maybe didn't age well. Outside of like in terms of the content, like watching it, the stunts are great. And
it doesn't feel like very like specifically 80s in the way that a lot of movies can.
Yeah.
You know, but probably because the fashion, I mean, everyone's pretty much wearing like uniforms and stuff, so which isn't going to age as much.
Yeah. The treatment of women is, you know, I watched this and Heavy Metal both with my wife, who deserves an award having stuck it through both of these movies. It's, I don't know. If I have to choose thumbs up or thumbs down, I think I might go thumbs down. Just I want something a little bit deeper, a little more meaningful. That's
I mean, but not everything has to be deep and meaningful. With that said, I mean, that's not the movie they were setting out to make. Now that's the movie that Dan O'Bannon was setting out to make.
Exactly.
And I would be willing. I would be excited if someone were to go back and remake this and use Dan O'Bannon's original script as the basis, even though it would have to be updated. But I think that the themes of his original script, which we see a little bit of in the movie, but I think the themes of that, like the idea of the government using this technology to watch your everything, and the idea of, the police not necessarily all being good guys.
Right.
It's very relevant to 2021. And something that I think could make
very much
a really good movie if somebody were to really like have the balls to do that.
They were going for more Rambo 3 than Rambo 1, though. Like when the studio got a hold of it. So.
By the time they got a hold of it, that's exactly what they were doing.
Now by the way, that cinematography you guys are talking about, that's John Alonzo. I mentioned that, and he did like Chinatown and Vanishing Point and Star Trek Generations. Todd. So
there we go.
Oh, nice.
So working with Malcolm McDowell again, by the way.
There you go. Yeah, John Alonzo is a really great cinematographer. He's a Mexican born cinematographer, and he's won a lot of awards. I think he did Scarface too.
That may be right.
As well for Brian De Palma. Yeah, if I remember correctly. But yes, he's a legendary cinematographer who unfortunately died fairly young, in his mid 60s in like the early 2000s or so. But yes, The cinematography is outstanding. I absolutely agree. And you know, Blue Thunder doesn't have, it's not like a cult classic. I do think it deserves more of a following than it does. It's weird that it's not more remembered now, because it was kind of a big deal at the time. I mean, like we said, it knocked Flashdance out of the #1 spot. It made a lot of money. It had good reviews, and it was a big enough hit to inspire a television series after its release, also called Blue Thunder. It aired for 11 episodes in 1984 before being canceled due to low ratings. The TV series starred the character's a different name. It's not Frank Murphy, it's Frank something else, but it's basically the same character. But James Ferrantino, the sheriff from Dead and Buried, was the main character in the Blue Thunder series.
Nice.
And he was the policeman and the pilot of the helicopter, and his sidekick, his partner, was Dana Carvey,
who uses the helicopter blades to chop broccoli.
This would have been, I mean, 1984, that would have been before his stint on SNL, right?
I believe so.
Like right before, probably.
Yeah.
Because I saw that
And if
picture. He looks like a kid.
Yeah. And if that's not weird enough, the Blue Thunder's ground crew was played by former football players Bubba Smith and Dick Butkus.
Well, Bubba Smith is Hightower in the Police Academy movies.
Yeah. He's a big dude. So strange. And there was also a Blue Thunder video game that was released much later in 1987. It was released on the Action Max game system. You guys remember Action Max?
No.
No.
I sure didn't either. So I looked into it, and it's a very short-lived game console that used VHS tapes for games. So the Blue Thunder, really weird. And you actually had to hook your own VCR to the console. It didn't have the ability to play tapes, which probably did not help sales. Like, oh yeah, you can buy this, but you've also got to have your own fucking VCR. but by doing that, it would be able to utilize actual clips from the movie on, as part of the game. So
nice.
That was very strange.
I'm actually kind of intrigued about how the hell that even works. Like, what does it do? Is it like fast forwarding and rewinding to scenes from the movie? Like, what
do you have to rewind it every time you're done playing?
Yeah, that's what I'm like. What is this thing doing?
I don't understand it. I would love to get a hold of one.
That's insane.
Just to try it out.
Now, I will say, too, we talked about this a little bit up top, I think before we even hit record, but one weird thing about Blue Thunder, you talk about a cult following, there's a weird cult, presence on the internet for this movie, which is really strange. It's like cult presence on the internet, because there are sites you can find like Blue Thunder Online, and
yes, a lot of the interviews that we found, like the Starlog stuff, with Dan O'Bannon and even with Roy Scheider, like that was all found on Blue Thunder Online, I think is what it's called. And then which hasn't been updated since 2009, but they're still paying to host it. So somebody out there created an entire website dedicated to Blue Thunder. And then Gary, you found another one, right?
Yeah, the bluethunderhelicopter.com, which has
been more recently updated.
Yeah.
And it's just a Blue Thunder fan blog. So shout out to both of those guys running those for helping us with some material on this episode. Because it's very strange. So it may not have a big cult following, but at least a couple people out there care enough to create entire websites dedicated to this movie.
Justin's going to dig into there to find pictures of these like freaking model kits and everything. I'm looking at right now on bluethunderhelicopter.com at the cover.
The Japanese model kit?
No, right now I'm looking at the DVD cover for the complete series, Blue Thunder, starring James Ferrantino. It's just got the photos on the back and stuff.
Nice.
It is real weird. That's so odd that this exists. It's the site and the DVD set for the TV series.
But somebody out there wants it, I guess.
There was also talk I found, according to the Hollywood Reporter, but this was in like 2015, so who knows where this is going to go, but there was a remake in the works at one point. It was written by Craig Kyle, who's a former Marvel Studios executive, and he worked on, like, I know Thor and Thor Ragnarok, like he had worked on those, but the people that did, this is not going to sound promising, but it was like Dana Brunetti, who was executive producer on 50 Shades of Grey, was working on it with him. And anyway, I don't know. Obviously, it's 2021 now, and that's still not gone anywhere. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But that was apparently, there was talk about it. People haven't forgotten it existed.
Yeah, interesting.
I did want to mention that one of the sweet things I thought of or found from this movie is that although they were bitter enemies in the film, Roy Scheider and Malcolm McDowell met each other filming Blue Thunder and became the best of friends. And it lasted Roy Scheider's entire life, like that they were best friends with each other. And so there's like some sweet stuff you can find about, like, it broke that. Malcolm McDowell when Roy Scheider passed away, and he took care of the family and stuff like that, like all that stuff. But anyway,
I realize that. That's really cool. Yeah. So do you guys have any further viewing, any other movies that you would pair with this?
Yes.
Yeah, what you got? Because I didn't really I don't really have anything for this one, but
I've been trying to put some more thought
other
into
than
those.
I just kept thinking of like Knight Rider and other like other vehicle shows, you know.
Well, I was thinking more
movies.
I was thinking more of, because this, you know, really takes place on the canvas of Los Angeles. I thought, you know, and this is in the 80s, so if you're looking for a double or maybe even a triple header, maybe pairing this with Speed, I think would also be fun. Also, Italian Job, the remake of the Italian Job, which also takes place in Los Angeles and showcases the city. I think both of those are really fun and would make for a really fun evening of viewing.
All right, you lunatics. Well, I feel like this is the second time somehow this movie has come up on this show, and I don't know how or why that would happen, except this movie clearly is ripping off Blue Thunder, but Stealth from 2005 would be one to mention with Jamie Foxx and Jessica Biel and Josh Lucas.
I was like, who's the dude in that?
Well, I feel like it came up the time before it came up. I swear to God, it's come up again in this series. And Todd, we had that exact same conversation. We were both like, who the fuck was that white guy that was in it?
Yeah.
I can't even remember. Who was the generic white dude they used? It was Josh Lucas, with Jessica Biel and Jamie Foxx. But yeah, and it's about, they have the fourth stealth machine that's like extra super equipped, but it's AI enabled and it goes rogue. And so then they have to like battle with it. But anyway, it feels a lot of the plot points in this seem kind of like that movie sort of.
Okay. All right. I don't really have any. I mean, I guess that I kind of like the idea of doing director double features. So I think doing War Games would be really cool, just to see like two movies that John Badham did back to back in the same year and kind of compare and contrast them. Although I have not seen War Games in many years, so I can't really speak to that off the top of my head. But I know that it's a favorite of a lot of people our age.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. But yeah, this movie's fun. I mean, if you're just looking for like the 80s vibe, I mean, the score and everything too is very like synth heavy and like it's just a fun, I don't know, 80s movie. There's nothing like super special about it. And clearly what Dan O'Bannon, you know, like we said, had intended was left on the cutting room floor. Didn't even make it to the cutting room floor, I guess. But you know, anyway, next week he'll get his chance.
That's right. So O'Bannon, at this point in his career, was becoming frustrated by the whole process of filmmaking. He didn't seem to ever get to see his true vision come to life on screen, with his scripts constantly going through other screenwriters, other directors, other entities who changed them from his original intent. This was getting frustrating for him. After the release of Blue Thunder, he actually said, quote, "It's a bad business, Hollywood. I'm just about fed up. If I can't get something to direct soon, I'm going to get out of this business and be a novelist or something." But luckily for his next film, Dan O'Bannon would finally get to be the guy calling all the shots. Nice. Next week on the show, literally one of my favorite movies of all time. We're going to discuss Dan O'Bannon's directorial debut, Return of the Living Dead. Ooh. So I'm excited for that. Have you ever seen Return of the Living Dead, Todd?
I have. It's been a while, but I have seen it. I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
That's going to be fun to go into it with our new style of thing. I don't know. Maybe is that the first one we've like No, like Lethal Weapon we've redone.
Yeah, we've redone Night of the Living Dead. Our very first episode was a remake.
Oh, yeah.
Our re-record. But yes,
We're doing remakes of our old shit.
So where can you guys be found on the internet?
I am at This Is Gary Horn on all of the things. I have a wrestling show called at TIPW Show. That's not what it's called. It's called This Is Pro Wrestling, but it is at TIPW Show on all the things. And that's me. Bye.
and I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials. You can find my Star Trek podcast, the Computer Resume podcast, on Apple and Spotify and Amazon. And you can
just the places you find podcasts, wherever you're listening to
the places
podcast right now, you can find Todd's fucking podcast.
You can find it. But also you can reach out to the show at Computer Resume on all the socials.
And I am at Justin_Bishop. My only podcast is Cinema Shock, which you can find at cinema_shock, Twitter, Instagram. We're on Facebook. Head to cinemashock.net to find all of our old episodes, find links to buy our merch, find links to all of our socials, everything. Everything you need to know about this podcast is on cinemashock.net, including links to where you can stream upcoming movies that we're going to be talking about, not just next week's movie, but upcoming weeks as well. I usually put about the next 4 weeks or so on there. So give us a like on Facebook, rate, review on Apple, share us with all of your friends, and until next week,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys, and with Blue Thunder, we'll find them.
Yeah, good job, Todd.
I think I hurt myself reaching for that one.
Yeah, I think you did. I think that you should take your wife's advice and change it to the eggshell one.
Consider it.
It's a really good one. When you're walking on eggshells, don't hop.
Yeah. When you're walking on eggs, they say eggs.
Oh yeah, they do say eggs. When you're
would
walking
you not
on
say eggshells.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Who walks on eggs?
Who walks on eggshells?
That's true.
Who hops on any of it?
But Johnny has the keys. So
but the thing he doesn't. That's the whole thing.